We have reached the first weekend of the college football playoff. Travis Hunter wins the Heisman. The transfer portal still going nuts. We have another coaching change at the Power 4 level. Plenty of things to talk about. And, of course, we've got to make sure that we get Moose's Clemson Tigers talked about in here because college football is happening this weekend, and the first time we're going to experience the 12-team playoff.
I'm very excited. And guys, just in case you want to know, if you want like a little sneak peek behind the scenes, how much Jake and I love ball, we essentially just talked through the entire show before we even started recording. So, if you ever want to question Jake and I's love of the game, just know that we were podcasting just to each other, talking about ball.
We always talking ball.
We might be always talking about, you know what? That would be a great name for a podcast.
I think somebody should take that name for a podcast.
Someone should take it. I mean, honestly, like the way we play, it's like we're a 3-tech, like playing on the inside and defense. So that would be another good name for a podcast. 3-tech podcast.
3-tech. That could be an interesting one. That could be a very, very interesting one.
Yeah.
Somebody
shout out to the 3-tech pod and shout out to Always Talking Ball.
Yeah, great guys. Let's start with talking about the Heisman. Travis Hunter wins the Heisman Trophy. Ashton Jeanty comes in second place. We did our own little poll. It was only 9 voters compared to 400 and some or whatever the Heisman. I think it's actually like 800 voters. It was one of the closest votes in more than a decade, but Travis Hunter wins. Ashton Jeanty comes in second place. Weird stat is that Ashton Jeanty was on more ballots than Travis Hunter was, but Travis Hunter had more first place votes that gave him the victory. You and I both put Ashton Jeanty as our number 1. I think we both put.
Nope. I had him at 2.
You had him at 2. Okay,
I had him at 2.
You had Travis Hunter at 1.
Yep.
So I had Jeanty at 1. You had Hunter at 1. I think we had both had the opposites at 2. Who did you have on your third?
I think Cam Ward.
I had Cam Ward as well.
Yeah, I think it was Cam Ward. But like,
it was a 2-horse race.
If you didn't have Travis Hunter on your ballot, why do you have a Heisman vote? That's like, you're not voting for him out of hate. Like, that's just stupid.
Yeah, I think everybody you can disagree who you thought should have won, but I think everybody should agree that those were the 2 clear best players in the country this year.
Absolutely. Like I coming into this, I think both of us said, whoever wins, I will not be mad because they both very, very obviously deserved it. I mean, you can try to diminish what Travis Hunter did all you want, but when you're a top 10 corner and a top 10 wide receiver in this league, regardless of what you feel about the Biletnikoff Award and where it went, and in the Butkus Award and where it went, not the Butkus Award, but the Best Defensive Player Award and where it went, Travis Hunter getting both. Regardless of those 2 things, he was still a top 10 player at his position on the offensive and the defensive side of the ball. So how you could not have him on your ballot is asinine. And then you flip the side to Ashton Jeanty, and he is a once-in-a-decade, 2-decade running back. Like, you don't get guys like that. G5, Power 4, doesn't matter. You don't get guys who can run the football like that. And the only reason that Boise State is sitting at the 3 seed in the freaking college football playoff because of Ashton Jeanty. So that was 2 very, very, especially with what's been going on like the last decade with the Heisman Trophy, we finally got one where no one knew who it was going to be. It was a close race, and we had 2 very, very well-deserving non-quarterback guys that were coming up for this win. I wasn't disappointed at all, and I wouldn't have been disappointed if Ashton Jeanty won. They both were very, very deserving. Very deserving.
Yeah. I think when you go back and look at the voting, it was very clear that there was number 1, number 2. But, I mean, there were obviously voters who did not believe that. Because when you look at the first place votes, Travis Hunter had 552. Ashton Jeanty had 309. And then Dylan Gabriel had 24. Also, Dylan Gabriel was not the best quarterback in the country this year. Dylan Gabriel was the top quarterback on the top team.
Right, which is what the Heisman Trophy's been going to. So, like, if we would have followed the trend of the last decade, Dylan Gabriel.
Sometimes it does make sense. Joe Burrow winning the Heisman, clearly the best player in the country. Sometimes
Jaden Daniels.
Sense. Yeah, Jaden Daniels, but he wasn't the best player.
Oh, yeah, on the best team. You're right.
But, when you look back at like a Bryce Young, for instance, that one kind of felt a little bit more like best overall, like best player on presumptive best team.
Right.
So when you look at the top 10, I always love to look at the top 10 because Cam Ward was at 4. Cam Scatabo was at 5. Shout out Cam Scatabo because beginning of the year, nobody knew who he was.
Right.
Nobody knew who Cam Scatabo was, and he finished 5th. Bryson Daly out of Army gets 6th. Tyler Warren at 7 got a tight end in there in the top 10. I mean, he's obviously incredible, and he's very, very valuable to that Penn State team. Do I think that Heisman? No. And Penn State fans wanted to see him in New York. He was obviously incredible at what he does. They lined him up, and he was the most useful player. At 7. Shadur Sanders at 8. I respect that. I think Shadur Sanders has come a long way in the last 2 years, and I think he's become really good. Curtis Rourke at 9. Obviously what he's doing there at Indiana, and then Kyle McCord at 10.
I love it.
There were people trying to throw it at Ohio State's face, like Kyle McCord 10th in the Heisman voting. Kyle McCord was on 8 ballots.
And they were all from upstate New York.
There's more than 800 ballots, and he was on 8 of them. He was on less than 1% of the ballots. So let's not make it seem like finishing 10th here was some massive, there were 8 people that put him on the ballot. So it's not like there was a large majority of people that were doing it. But back to it, Travis Hunter, Ashton Jeanty, I'm just with you. Like, there are people that kept him off the ballot. It's kind of confusing. Don't know how you keep Travis Hunter off the ballot. I think some people just got very worn down by the Travis Hunter hype. The Coach Prime, the Travis Hunter stuff. I think they just got worn down and were like, "Yep, I'm immune to it."
Right. Well, and part of that is the media's fault. I mean, the media stayed on Travis Hunter and stays on Colorado, so it's very frustrating to people. But then a part of it too, like that people started to hyper focus on was the snap count, which it's a cardio trophy. No, that just tells you more about the prowess of the player it is. But when that's being shoved in your face 24/7, you kind of get sick of it.
He had almost 1,000 yards receiving. That's already a really good stat. And then everything that he did on defense, he's a cornerback, so he's not going to have 100 tackles. He's not supposed to have 100 tackles.
Exactly.
4 interceptions, and you look back, and he had the game-winning forced fumble against Baylor, who Baylor ended up being a way better team than we thought they were. Right. Baylor ended up winning 8 games this year, so Baylor was a really good team, at least in the Big 12. And
he had game-winning plays on offense and defense. Plays where he literally won the game. Yeah,
and he was the best player on both sides of the ball for them. Like, that's just, he was one of the main reasons why they were so successful. I said that somebody put out, I know it was Damian Harris on his podcast, put out something that said he believes that you should have to be in the playoff to be a Heisman Trophy winner, and I think that's
disagree.
Ridiculous. I think it's ridiculous. Because in football, you're relying on so many other guys. You're relying on so many other guys to play their assignments and do what they're supposed to do. You can be a superstar quarterback, but if your offensive line is a bunch of turnstiles and your wide receivers have butterfingers, you're not going to put up the stats, so you're not going to win it. But
case in point is Jaden Daniels. I mean, if he had a defense that had a breath of life, they're national champions. I mean, the stuff he did statistically was absolutely phenomenal, and you don't want him to be considered because he's not a playoff contender.
Because his defense can't allow less than 40 points in the game, and he's out here trying to, will his team to victory when everybody knows he's got the ball or what he's doing.
Right. The Heisman's for the most valuable player. How valuable do you think Jaden Daniels was to his team? How many games do you think they win without him?
Yeah. And I think you look at Travis Hunter, you look at Ashton Jeanty, and both of those win totals drop significantly without those.
Absolutely.
Significantly. And that's why I go to like a Oregon with Dylan Gabriel. If you put, the backup, Dante Moore, former 5-star quarterback in there, are they 13-0? Maybe not, but they're probably in the playoffs still. I can imagine that Oregon's not missing the playoff with Dante Moore.
Right.
So that's why it's like, I don't believe Dylan Gabriel really was that involved. That's why I had Cam Ward at 3, because Cam Ward was doing things at Miami to help push them to a playoff potential. And obviously they fell short, but same thing. Defense.
Yep. I mean, and Cam Ware threw for 4,300 yards, like
Yeah, he
holds
threw
a
for
bunch of records for single seasons in Miami history. I don't know if y'all remember what happened in the 80s and the 90s with Miami and the early 2000s. They have some freaking dogs that came through there. So for him to be in the record books offensively for that school, I mean,
yeah, it used to snow in Miami. Did you know that? They used to
Yeah.
have lots of snow in Miami.
Yeah, apparently. Not the legal
Anyways,
kind.
yeah. Let's talk about the transfer portal here. We've got a lot of guys moving around. So I just want to talk about a little bit about it. Not going to dive fully into it because you have guys that are making commitments and then flipping their commitments. But anyways, major one enters with Zachariah Branch from USC. USC has lost a ton of guys on both sides of the ball. They also lose Deuce Robinson. Their backup running back, who slipped in my mind, is left. Miller Moss is obviously out.
Bear Alexander
again. Zachariah Branch's brother Zion on defense is out. They've lost a ton of guys. I saw some stat. I think 9 of the 12 best recruits from Lincoln Riley have entered the portal.
Did you see the meme of Bear Alexander where he's flexing in a Penn State uniform with a Georgia tattoo on his bicep, and his profile picture is him in a USC uniform?
That is the
definition tells you what kind of person he is. Portal. But see, the problem is with players like that is he's the reason that people hate the transfer portal. Like that's the guy that you hate. It's not the transfer portal you hate. It's guys like Bear Alexander who are literally just jumping from team to team every single year, trying to get money, trying to get a different opportunity. Like he is anti what college football is meant to be. I mean,
yeah, you get the Georgia tattoo because you can't ink it yet, so you put the ink on your arm, but then you jump when you get a chance. I forget I think Bear was only there for 1 year before he hit the portal. And obviously now he's going to Penn State, which I'm actually surprised Penn State is like interested in him when you have a guy that's jumping around like that. Obviously he's got talent, but he didn't really show it much this year. He's obviously a big force in the middle, but I figured Penn State wouldn't have the interest in a guy like that because Bo Prabula hits the portal and they say, hey, you're either in or you're out. And since you say that you're in the portal, you're out, but you're going to bring in a guy that has been jumping in the portal whenever it opens again.
Let's talk about Bo Prabula. 2 things can be true. He can be abandoning his team and he can be doing what's best for him because of the portal situation. Both of those things can be true. Like it doesn't have to be one or the other.
Preston Stone and Devin Brown are both in the portal, but they're both joining their team for the playoff.
Jake,
this isn't a basketball podcast.
I know, but we're going to overtime, baby.
Clemson, South Carolina basketball, just like everybody cares about.
You're right. 0.3 seconds left. Hit a 3 off the backboard. Take it to overtime. Dagger in the heart. But anyway.
Yeah, Preston Stone and Devin Brown are quarterback 2 on their team when they play this weekend.
But you got to think about it this way too, Jake. Like I understand James Franklin's stance, but I also understand like why the guys have to go in there. But what are they going on visits? I don't.
I'm not sure. I don't know that.
Like, what's the point? If you're not going to do anything until after the playoff runs over, there's really no point in your name being in there unless you're doing it to let schools know to wait. But schools aren't going to wait. This isn't a waiting game. So
also, I think there's a misconception of like the spots, and obviously there are like spots, but you also like Wisconsin just took Danny O'Neal, who was the starting quarterback at San Diego State as a true freshman, but then they also just took Billy Edwards, who was the starting quarterback at Maryland.
Right. So he decommitted from Michigan, is now going somewhere else.
Yeah, so Billy Edwards is going to Wisconsin.
Wisconsin.
Yeah,
yep,
they're both going to Wisconsin. Danny O'Neal from San Diego State's going to Wisconsin, and so is Billy Edwards. So both of them were starting quarterbacks, and now they're going to compete against each other. And let's say Bo Prabula goes to, I saw one was linked was Ole Miss. Lane Kiffin's not bringing in one quarterback. Lane Kiffin brought in Sanders from Oklahoma State and made him ride the bench. Behind Jackson Dart.
Jackson Dart. What was Sanders' first name? Or what is, sorry. This isn't posthumous.
Spencer Sanders.
Spencer Sanders, yeah.
I saw Mizzou was one that he's linked to. And like these jobs, they're not going to give them out to a guy with no starting experience. That's the thing.
I don't have any sympathy for guys jumping in now on a playoff roster because it's selfish. At the end of the day, it's just selfish. I understand it's the way the portal is set up, but it's still selfish because you could go in January, you could go in the spring. It's I understand why he's
Here's
doing
my thought with this too, is because obviously they play this weekend and Penn State's expected to win, but the portal opens after these playoff teams. Like there's a window for playoff teams after they go.
But go ahead. Sorry, finish your thought.
And recruiting for like transfers is much different than it is for recruiting high school players.
It's speed dating.
It's speed dating. Like honestly, there are guys who want to visit on a Monday, on a Tuesday, on a Wednesday, and they're trying to make a decision by Thursday because they want to have it wrapped up by the holiday. They want to have it wrapped up, by before Christmas, basically, and they want to know where they're going for the first of the year. And I get that, and I 100% understand what they're doing there, because if you go after the first of the year, people say that academic. There are ways. I can promise you that there are ways that if you enter the portal in the middle of January after your team is done, there are ways to get to that program.
Right.
There, is late enrollment. There's second half semester courses. They will find a way to get you on campus so you can practice in the spring.
Right.
So there are ways to do it.
My biggest issue with the guys at the playoff roster is all that does is start conversation. It's a distraction. For what? You're on the biggest stage of your career, and you're causing a distraction for the team so that you can have a better opportunity. It's selfish. That's why I don't like it.
Kenny Dillingham, I think he made a comment about anybody that enters the portal, they're more than welcome to be part of the team. And I think that is what's going to have to happen.
Well, that's genius too, because go ahead. Sorry.
I say that's going to have to happen because this portal's not going away. It's not going away. And as much as we want to complain about the timing of it, there's really no other time to do it, because if you wait till the beginning of February, I talked about all these creative ways. Doing it for 900 athletes is a little bit different than doing it for a dozen.
Right. Well, and think about this too. Like Kenny Dillingham has already eliminated the elephant in the room. So by saying that, like, it's not as awkward. Yeah, the guy's leaving, but he's there for the rest of the. I mean, I don't know. It eliminates one of the elephants in the room. It's still awkward knowing that dude's not going to be with you next year.
But it's obvious.
You know what? They might change their mind and come back.
Yeah, exactly. And there's also part of it that, like, hey, look, you understand that, like, maybe you don't have a role here, and maybe you don't have a future role here because you're, a redshirt junior and you've seen 25 meaningful snaps this year. You want to be here because these are your guys. This is your brothers, but also you want to go and start somewhere. Like, that's your goal, is like, you love this program, and no matter how hard you work, there's just somebody else that's better than you on this program. And you understand that you need to go to New Mexico rather than Arizona State. And like, I think if you're Kenny Dillingham, that's a win-win for you.
I understand that.
You understand.
Bubula has won a game for Penn State. I mean,
that dude bleeds blue and white.
What's that?
That dude bleeds blue and white. He is a Pennsylvania local. He grew up rooting for Penn State. Like, I'm almost surprised that James Franklin doesn't want him to be around, because if something, God forbid, were to happen to Drew Aller, I mean, the season's probably over if Drew Aller gets hurt anyways, but now you're putting a true freshman quarterback in.
Right, but go in January. Go in the post-playoff portal period.
If you're that good, there will always be a spot for you.
Exactly. So I don't have any sympathy for him. I do have sympathy for most of the athletes and what's going on. Bo Pabula specifically, I'm like, I don't know. I'm not cool with it. I know there's some Clemson guys that have jumped out and they're not contributing.
We've also had a Clemson guy jump in.
Yeah, let's talk about that.
Clemson Smith took a transfer. I don't know anything about it. I just think this is something where Clemson finally took a transfer, and ironically, it's like a Division II player that's jumping into Clemson.
Southeast Missouri State, always have loved Southeast Missouri State. Been a big fan from afar.
Do you even know what their colors are?
Yes, I have watched a lot of Tristan Smith tape. They are red. They wear a lot of red, a little bit of black mixed in there. So Tristan Smith, 6'5", 205. if I want to evaluate him really quick for all you Clemson people that are listening, great hands, violent hands, really attacks the ball, plays with some swag. The only thing I don't like about him as a football player, he doesn't seem fast. There's not much breakaway speed. So I would be curious to see what he looks like against other D1 athletes. But apparently he was considered for D1 places, but didn't have the grades. So we'll see. We'll see.
This is a huge thing for Clemson because the only transfers you've really ever taken were basically like Hunter Johnson, like guys coming back to the program.
Hunter Johnson and Paul Tyson, baby.
Yeah, guys that weren't ever really going to contribute and were just coming there to finish out their career.
Fun fact, we took a transfer while I was there. He was a quarterback from Stanford who was from Irmo, who had graduated and came back. He was just a backup the whole time. But we took a transfer when I was in school.
I think this, though, is a little bit different, signifying like, okay, hey, here's a need. And I think you and I have said this a lot. The portal is not meant to go and find superstars. Occasionally, they jump in the portal. Occasionally, Zachariah Smith jumps in the portal. But for the most part, most of the guys are to help fill voids.
Yeah,
help with
it's supplemental.
Understanding that, okay, hey, looking into 2025, we only got 12 offensive linemen on the roster. We want to be at 14.
Right.
Like understanding that, like, yeah, okay, we go 2 deep across, but we are not able to go 3 deep across unless we're using red or walk-ons, which now are changing the landscape. And maybe that's one reason why Dabo is also looking at it with the potential of walk-ons also being eliminated.
Yeah. So that's part of it. And there's potentially one other that they're probably going to get, or hopefully will get, Will Hilt, defensive end from Purdue, who's very lengthy guy, very fast, unpolished pass rusher, doesn't really have many moves in his repertoire, but when he does get home, he gets home hard, plays good in the run game, good at squeezing, good at playing the read option, good at playing from behind. So hopefully we get that guy because we definitely need some defensive end depth, especially with some of the guys that jumped in the decommitted from us. Isaiah Campbell and Bryce Davis, 2 of them from this class. So excited to see that that's happening. I mean, what people don't understand is Clemson was in the portal last year, tried to get guys on visits, didn't work out. I think there was 3 offensive linemen they offered and just nothing came of it. So this is the first year that they've finally gotten a name that could be contributing for playtime. So exciting times for the Clemson Tigers.
Yeah. I think this just shows the shift in landscape that Dabo kind of realized, and it wasn't quite this year because last year, they were looking at guys, but when it first started, he was pretty, fist on the table of saying, this is our culture, like this is what we're doing. But he understands now it's like, he's seen a lot of guys leave in the portal and it's hard to backfill recruiting wise.
You say a lot. We're one of the fewest. So it's us and the service academies that are the lowest on guys that leave.
You get what I'm saying though, is like you're losing multiple guys. You're not losing just one guy out of the portal. There's a handful, that have left in the portal over the course of the years. We're not talking about, a full exodus, like 40 guys, but even if you lose 5 or 6 guys in the portal every year, that it's hard to backfill because your recruiting class is already signed.
Right.
And now you're losing guys.
And to only backfill with high school athletes, you're starting those guys from ground zero rather than, if you lose a guy who's been there for 2 years, you've already had him built in the weight room.
And his culture, I think, is still going to stand the test of time.
Right.
And it's an understanding that these players understand. These guys have friends on other teams. They know what's going on. Yeah. That they understand that their whole goal is to win.
Right. And then to add to that, too, with the goal culture piece, another reason that he was so reluctant is Dabo's never going to take a scholarship away from a player for no reason, just to replace him with someone else. The only time a guy's going to get his scholarship taken away is if he does something stupid repeatedly. Because there's been guys who I played with who probably should have lost their scholarship a lot sooner than they did. But he's not going to be a coach that's going to treat it like the NFL and cut people. It's just not going to happen there. So, and I think, that bodes well for us in high school recruiting because those guys aren't coming in worried about getting replaced by an older guy. So it's like a catch-22 from that aspect.
if they know that, okay, yeah, that Clemson is going to take, 2 to 5 or probably not even 5, like 2 to 4 transfers a year, that's way different.
You're safe.
That's way, yeah. And it wouldn't shock me if one of the days comes where I know you have a kicker right now, but it's like, if your punter transfers out, it's a lot easier to probably go find one in the portal than it is to go and try to recruit another punter.
Yeah, out of high school.
After it's happened, or go get an Aussie, whatnot. Especially at this point, it's way easier to just go and find a guy who's done it at a smaller school and take
walk
him
into
in.
Outback Steakhouse, pick up a waiter. I mean, they're all Australian there.
Go to the soccer team, call up a soccer team and see what they're doing. One other big piece of news that happened over the course of the week: Dave Clawson stepped down at Wake Forest.
I kind of saw this happening. I didn't think it was going to be this year, but I saw it happening soon. I thought he was just going to work out his contract and then be done. He has been very, very, very vocal about this landscape of college football because Wake Forest, the teams like Wake Forest are the teams that get the brunt of it. They're losing everybody that plays well. I mean, look at Sam Hartman, who was a phenomenal football player for Wake Forest. See ya, goes to Notre Dame, like right when they needed him the most.
Even before that, it was Jamie Newman who left to go to Georgia.
Jamie Newman goes to Georgia and doesn't do a thing there. Doesn't even play.
Well, it's because he didn't play. Yeah, he sat out for COVID, then went pro, and just nobody ever heard of him again.
Right, and I thought he was a phenomenal football player. So, the portal giveth, the portal taketh away. Dave Clawson was a phenomenal football coach. They really are losing someone who is a great culture builder. Which I guess they're not losing him because he's going to be an advisor. But I think he's just tired of dealing with the uncertainty of who's going to be on his team every single year.
Yeah, and I'm not really sure who is going to replace him. I've looked it up a couple of times, and like the same names pop up, but Wake Forest is not a great job.
You're competing against UNC, who now has Bill Belichick. You're competing against Duke, who now has Manny Diaz. You're competing against NC State. You're competing against Clemson. You're competing against Georgia. You're competing against Tennessee, because that's where all that because North Carolina is a hotbed for recruits, but nobody wants to go to Wake Forest. That's not their first choice.
Wake Forest is kind of like the Vanderbilt of the ACC.
Yeah, and but every now and then they'll have a good year and can be frisky, but most
Wake
times
Forest doesn't have a huge enrollment, so you don't have like that affiliation. Like, you're not the only school in your state, so it's not like that's the only one people to root for. North Carolina's got 4 Power 4 schools in the ACC alone.
Right.
Let alone, depending where you live, you might be rooting for Virginia Tech, Tennessee, South Carolina, or Clemson.
Right. Absolutely.
So, yeah, the fan base isn't huge. Like, I pulled up an article, and the 3 names that popped up were Shannon Dawson, Miami's offensive coordinator, Glenn Schumann, Georgia's defensive coordinator, and Brian Hartline. None of those 3 guys are taking that job.
If Brian Hartline goes to freaking Wake Forest, that's we're living.
You know how much they'd have to pay him to be the head coach at Wake Forest?
They would give him a hospital. And
Wake Forest might be. I don't want to say it's the worst job in the ACC. I think Boston College is the worst job in the ACC just because of the location. I think for the location, I think it's the worst job in the ACC. I think Syracuse is a better job. I think Pitt is a better job. Yeah, I think that might be well, I forgot that Cal and Stanford are technically in the ACC as well. Stanford is a tougher job, but Stanford has some more history. But where Stanford is right now, I think Wake Forest would be a better job than Stanford.
Right.
But I mean, out of the 17 teams in the ACC, it's like one of the bottom 3. They're going to hire some dude that's just, they got to pull somebody local. They got to find a dude from North Carolina that can just try to keep some of the 2nd and 3rd tier North Carolina kids home, because they're not going to be able to compete for the top kids. They're not going to get the high 5 stars or high 4 stars out of there.
Well, counter argument, we were saying the same thing about Duke, and they flipped Bryce Davis from Clemson, and he's now the highest rated kid, high school recruit in Duke history. So, I mean, that's how stuff gets turned around. So maybe they go and get a young guy who.
Manny Diaz did walk into a better situation than whoever.
No, I agree. Brian Cutcliffe and Mike Elko really, created a bigger football culture at that school. But you're competing with the basketball team every year, so that part stinks. But there is hope. Yeah, you get a local guy, get Bo Podgy to come in there. That might bring some hype to it.
Biff Poggi.
Biff Poggi, sorry.
Yeah, when he got
Did it
fired from
backwards.
Charlotte. Yeah, we got fired from Charlotte. Yeah, that I'm sure that would be great.
Jake, let's jump into these playoff games.
Yeah, let's jump into the playoff games. Which one you want to talk about first?
Let's start. Let's go in order. Let's go Indiana Notre Dame. Let's go with the Friday matchup, the Battle of Indiana.
Indiana Notre Dame. What do you think is the biggest key for Indiana on Friday night?
I got made fun of a little bit online, but I think it's the trenches. It's every game. Well, it really is in this case, because you want to prove that your guys, especially your defensive line, who you only have one power 4 guy on the defensive line, can compete with a Notre Dame recruited offensive line. So I want to see that they can hold their own in the trenches. They don't have to dominate like they've been all year. They just need to hold their own and not get bullied. And I think if we see that, man, Indiana's got a really, really good shot of winning. I mean, Curtis Rourke is a phenomenal quarterback, and I don't think he gets enough credit. I mean, he did at the beginning of the year, and then I think it's similar to Colorado, where people are getting tired of hearing about him, so they start bashing him and picking him apart. And Indiana, and they're playing with house money. There's no pressure on them. So this is going to be a big time game. They're playing an in-state rival, which rival I use that very loosely. I'm just saying that's because they're in-state. I think this is going to be a phenomenal football game, and I'm so glad that this is the one that's kicking off the 12-team playoff, the first 12-team playoff game in college football history.
Yeah, this game, I think it's going to be pretty low scoring.
Yes, take the under.
Yeah, I am interested to see how Notre Dame moves the ball, because Riley Leonard is not a quarterback who airs it out. We've seen it this year. He can do a lot with his legs. He could move around the pocket. Jeremiah Love is a really good running back, a name that's not talked about enough. How is Notre Dame going to move the ball down the field, and can they get creative to get the ball to like Mitchell Evans or Bo Collins or other guys that are out on the outside there, to move the ball down the field? Because Indiana, their defense has played really well. Even against Ohio State, the defense played really well for the most part.
And I wanted to bring that up because if you watch that Indiana-Ohio State game and didn't just look at the box score and didn't just look at the scoreboard, they held their own. It's not like Ohio State out-physicaled them, out-talented them. They out-schemed them. So it's when Jim Knowles flipped from bringing 4 to 5 man pressures to 6 to 7, and they never adjusted. And they just could not do anything. I think they had 3 total yards from halfway through the second quarter to the third quarter, and just could not move the football. If they can make the adjustment, it's like that game, and then I look at Nebraska. I think Nebraska is probably the game that showed me that Indiana can compete with people. Now, say what you want about Nebraska, they still are recruiting at a high clip, at least traditionally higher than Indiana. So that's the game too that makes me think that this is Indiana's got a real shot. And look at that. Look at the defense statistics, Jake. I don't care who you play. I know they have the easiest schedule against the opposing offenses. I think they're 101st. They face the 101st ranked, on average offense, but they have the first ranked rush defense, allowing 2.4 yards a carry, 2.46, and the 9th ranked pass defense at 174 yards per game. People don't just throw the ball and move the ball all over them.
Yeah. You talk about the Ohio State Indiana game. The biggest thing was Curtis Rourke couldn't ever get comfortable back there.
Yeah.
And when you look at Notre Dame, can they force the pressure to do the same thing? Because if they can get pressure on Indiana, I think you will see a similar result.
Right.
I don't think that Curtis Rourke is going to be able to sit back in the pocket all day. I think Al Golden's going to bring some creative pressures. And the Notre Dame secondary is one of the best in the country. Now, I think that stat is inflated a little bit because when you play 2 military academies, you look at the stats, they're not going to throw the ball nearly as much. And their schedule was obviously a little bit lighter.
Right.
But I do think that Indiana, I think Curtis Rourke's going to find some success. And I think when you give Curt Cignetti enough time, Like, this isn't 1 week to prepare. They've probably had a good idea that they were going to draw Indiana since the last game of the year.
Right.
Or I think Indiana was going to draw Notre Dame.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just with how things were lining up, I'll bet you that week before it was all announced, there was probably a little bit extra attention put on Notre Dame.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Knowing that, okay, maybe you draw, Texas, maybe you draw Penn State, but really it feels like you're going to draw Notre Dame.
And to go back to the Notre Dame thing with, Indiana already being prepared, a lot of people are talking about Riley Leonard being an X factor. I was listening to the Always Talking Ball podcast. They had Jake Crane on their show, and they think that Riley Leonard is the biggest X factor quarterback in the playoff right now. And I am on the exact opposite end, because Riley Leonard giveth and Riley Leonard taketh away. So if Riley Leonard cannot run the ball and Notre Dame's offense cannot run the football, it's going to be a long day. It's going to be a long day because he does not pass the ball consistently, nor does Notre Dame have good pass catchers on the outside. Jaden Greathouse, good receiver. Bo Collins, good receiver. No, none of them are great. None of them are scaring you. Mitchell Evans might scare you a little bit. I mean, what he can do after he gets the ball in his hands and in terms of body control and getting himself open in short yard situations. But, and if Notre Dame marches the ball down the field, they're kicking a lot of field goals. Excuse me, I take that back. They don't score every single time. They go for it on fourth down a lot. They're 74th in the country in red zone efficiency. They don't score every time they're there. 83.7% of the time they're there. So that's not great. So if it turns into a dogfight, Indiana's got a really, really good shot. Really, really good shot.
Yeah, I think Indiana needs to try to get this game to be ugly. I don't think a super clean game on both sides. If they can force 1 or 2 turnovers out of Riley Leonard, I think they've got a puncher's chance.
Right.
The other thing is Indiana is trying to do something similar to what the Tennessee team is doing. We'll talk about here soon. Is they're trying to take over Notre Dame Stadium because Indiana and Notre Dame are in the same state.
Right.
The state of Indiana is not super big. It's only a couple hours away. So I think you're going to see a decent amount of red there, decent amount of, or I guess, crimson and white or crimson and cream. I don't know what their colors are technically. Crimson and cream sound right. But I don't think this is going to be a Notre Dame crowd that is 100% Notre Dame. I think you're going to see a small contingent of Indiana fans that might be able to help with the noise there a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't think – look at Northern Illinois. I know I keep bringing that up, but Northern Illinois wasn't daunted by that crowd.
Obviously, very different atmosphere. This one's a little bit more amped. But one thing I was looking up while we were doing this was Notre Dame is 37th in sacks this year. They've had 30. Indiana is 22nd with 34. So both these teams can get after the quarterback. Curtis Rourke, like we said, talked about way more pocket passer. Indiana needs to contain Leonard. If he starts scrambling, they can't let him get loose.
Well, let's take that a step further. If Riley Leonard wants to be a runner, they're 16th in the country. Indiana is in tackles for loss per game with 7.2. And so not only are they sacking the quarterback at a good clip, they don't mess around. They get in that backfield. So, I'm curious to see how this game goes. Are we picking right now? Or are we going to wait?
Let's wait. Let's pick them all at the end.
Okay.
We'll pick them all at the end. Second one here. Let's talk about the SMU Penn State game. Let's talk about the SMU. We'll save our 2 for the end. Penn State's an 8.5-point favorite in this game. We've got the noon game in. We'll just go in order. What if we do that? This is the noon game on Saturday. To me, the key to this one is Penn State just needs to play their game.
Yeah.
Penn State has to play their game. I think there's a little bit more to it, but I think that they cannot look at the moment. If you look at, I know it sounds cliche, but you can't look at the numbers in front of the names. You can't look at that because Penn State held their own for the most part against Oregon. Like, they've gone toe-to-toe with Ohio State. They went toe-to-toe with Oregon. And a couple times they just overthink themselves. You look back against the Ohio State game against Penn State, 3 times in the red zone, 4 times in the red zone, they didn't score, or the 4 plays in the red zone, they didn't score, but they didn't give the ball to Tyler Warren.
Right.
Tyler Warren is your best player on offense. You need to get your best players the ball, get your skilled players the ball, let them make their plays. Understand that your defense is good enough to win this game. Your defense is good enough. There's enough guys. Abdul Carter is going to get after Kevin Jennings. He's going to have at least 1 sack, if not 2 in this game.
Right. And I compare Abdul Carter a lot to TJ Parker. I know I'm biased, but TJ Parker for Clemson, and he had a lot of success in the game against SMU. Honestly, I would have argued that he should have been the ACC MVP. But so SMU's offensive line is very vulnerable. You can get after him, but Kevin Jennings is mobile enough to be able to move around and still make plays regardless of pressure. And after the first quarter, he really adapted that. I mean, because the pressure didn't stop on him the rest of the game. He was still getting people in his face the entire game and still just kept making plays. I think the biggest key in this game, Jake, is the fact that SMU is 4th in the country in rush defense. They only allow 2.74 yards per carry. And I don't think people realize how that's not like, once you're in the top 10 in a statistic and you're a Power 4 school, I don't care who you've played. I really, truly don't. You're a good defense. And SMU has enough guys that have transferred in from other Power 4 programs for it not to be a Cinderella story. This isn't TCU from a couple years ago. These guys have dudes all across the line. So them being 4th in the country, they only give up 93.4 yards a game, 2.74 yards a carry. They are very vulnerable in the back end, but I think it's because they load that box and you will not run the football in them. So they get after the quarterback and they get in the backfield a lot. They're right up there with Indiana. They're 12th in the country at 7.3 tackles for loss per game. And Penn State, they're middle of the road in passing. We're going to find out, and that's not because of Drew Aller. I want to make that clear too. I don't think that's because of Drew Aller. I think that's because of guys like Julian Fleming who aren't consistent. They don't catch the ball very well. And then regardless of how good your tight end is, I mean, you're not throwing deep shots 30 yards down the field to your tight end all the time. You're not throwing 15-yard routes to your tight end all the time. Most of the stuff is 10-yard plays. So I don't know. And I was very impressed with SMU's linebackers and their ability to guard. But Jake Bringstor in our game had a really, really good showing against SMU, which is our tight end. So I don't know. I've been looked at with some crazy eyes when I talk about this game because I truly think SMU can not only compete with Penn State but beat them. I think they have a really, really good chance of going into Happy Valley and beating them.
Yeah, you talk about SMU's ability to get put teams behind the sticks. They are in the top 10 in tackles for loss. They've had 95 tackles for loss this year. Really good number. On the other side, Penn State is in the top 10 in tackles for loss allowed. They're at 8th with 47. They allow less than 4 tackles per loss per game.
3.62 to be exact.
So you want to talk about best versus best. That's partially Penn State's offensive line, but also partially the running backs. Katron Allen and Nick Singleton are really good running backs. They are tough to bring down. Especially Nick Singleton's very athletic. He can make guys miss. Katron Allen's way more of a downhill runner. That between those two guys, SMU is going to have their hands full. Like it's a combo of running backs that they haven't faced yet this year.
Can I say this too, just to go back to the Heisman Trophy conversation? Did you see the stat where Ashton Jeanty, I think it was 1,600 yards after contact? Yeah, he had 1,600 yards after contact. That's a great season. And he did that. That was his season this year after getting hit. That's not his total yards carrying. That's after being hit the first time. 1,600 yards.
If you just took his yards after contact, plenty of running backs would take that for the season.
Yeah, I'm saying that's a great season.
But that also shows for Jeanty, he wasn't just hitting the holes and going, that he was working for that, because that's only like 400 other yards where he has before contact.
Yeah, but to come back to the topic, if Penn State wants to win this football game, they really, really need the receivers to step up. I mean, I don't know. You're not. I don't think you're going to consistently run the football on SMU. I don't think you can just do what you've done all year. I mean, look at the Ohio State game. Penn State tried to keep running the football, and they just couldn't. They just couldn't do it. And I'm not saying SMU has Ohio State's defense. Do not hear what I'm not saying. But what I am saying is, it seems like Penn State is a bunch of knuckleheads up in the press box who aren't going to change. They're going to do what they do to their own detriment sometimes. And if SMU is still on that Russian attack, which is their bread and butter, man, this could be another low-scoring game. We could have 2 low-scoring games to start off the college football playoff, and I love it because a lot of these college football casuals are going to be pissed. This is terrible. It's going to be phenomenal, Jacob. It's going to be phenomenal.
So SMU's defense, their secondary isn't phenomenal, but they are actually 3rd in the country in passes defended, which didn't realize, and they're 4th in the country in passes broken up.
They're very, very aggressive. Very aggressive. And I think that's why it looks like because they give up 232 yards a game and they've given up 24 touchdowns, but it's because they're so freaking aggressive.
But these wide receivers aren't as talented, as even Clemson's that they played,
right.
2 weeks ago. That Harrison Wallace and Julian Fleming, and Liam Clifford, those guys, none of them are real game breakers. They're fine. Omari Evans, they're fine. None of them come to you and say, yep, that's the number 1 dude. You got to cover him.
Right.
Like they just got Kyron Hudson, I think his name is, out of USC, who had the one-handed catch against LSU. That's the number 1 dude. They need to be asking him if he can suit up this weekend, because that's the dude that'd be the number 1 wide receiver next year. None of these guys, they're all role players. They are all role players. There's a reason why Drew Aller doesn't hit the wide receivers. Partially, Tyler Warren, the running backs, are the main, focus, but also these guys are role players. They're a lot of wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3s. And when you have a bunch of guys that are wide receiver 3 on their teams, they're way easier to cover. And, they're going to have to make plays. Like Julian Fleming has made some big plays this year. He made a massive play against USC and helped them win the game. If he doesn't make a catch on 4th down, they're losing that game. They're probably not in the playoff. But now the moment is here. This is what you've been playing for all year.
Yep.
And
it's going to be cold. Good God. If we don't stop talking about that crap. Hey,
did you know it's going to be like 20 degrees in State College?
Yeah. Listen, and I tweeted about this while I was taking the trash out earlier. I'm not to derail you, Jake. I'm really sorry. I'm the worst about this, but for some reason that just made me mad. It's the way you said it just reminded me of cold weather and how people won't shut up about it. Listen, regionality in recruiting is still there for them somewhat, but it's not as big as it used to be. So many guys from Florida, Texas, California are playing in Penn State, are playing at SMU, are playing in all these different places. Nobody when it's cold for everybody. And if it's 22 degrees, I don't know, man. It's not single digits. I think between 20 and maybe I'm stupid, but between 20 and 40, cold is cold.
Yeah. I mean, cold is cold. I will say once you hit below freezing, then it starts to hit me a little harder.
It does hit a little different. You're right. But once you start playing, you're not thinking about how cold it is. You're not. You're so locked in. You're moving. Your body's hot. You're moving around.
They also have so many ways to keep these guys warm down there.
Put that tiger paste or whatever they call it on everybody and just call it a day.
They have those things they put on these guys' arms. That's why, even when it's below 0, you watch the NFL and these guys don't have sleeves on. It's because they have that stuff on their arms to make it so that
it's tiger something. Tiger what?
Yeah, I forget what it's called. It's basically a glue they put on themselves. It's like Vaseline almost, where they put it on and it keeps all their body heat in them. But I mean, as soon as they come off, they're in a jacket. They've got heaters down there. I'm sure that they'll be fine.
If SMU gets blown out, I'll put that stuff on my body and sit outside for 3 hours.
You'll probably stay warm.
Well, yeah. Be good content.
Yeah, it'll be great content. We'll put a live stream on you while you do it. To me, for Penn State, like I said, they need to play their game. They need to play their game. Drew Aller announced he's coming back. I will say kind of announced he's coming back. His statement never said, I will be back in 2025.
I'll be back.
He just said that I'm looking forward to more memories. Never said that I'm coming back, which really just meant that I think he's leaving the door open. If they win the national championship and he goes off, then yeah, he's going to go pro, and Penn State fans will wish him well. But yeah, I think they're in a good position. SMU has played a lot of weird games this year. They lose to BYU. They bench their quarterback. They turn the ball over like 6 times against Duke and somehow win.
On a block extra point.
They were up big on Clemson, and my bad. Clemson was up big on them. Yeah. They were down big and then fought back. Like they looked like they were going to get blown out of the water, then fought back and tied the game up. It's been a bunch of weird games. I think this game could also get weird. I think you could see some oddities in this game. Wouldn't shock me if we've got non-quarterbacks throwing touchdowns at some point.
Right, and like the people who are like, oh, SMU doesn't belong in this game. Penn State's going to dominate them. This is the same Penn State team that went down to the wire with Minnesota. We do remember that, right? They won. Yeah. They beat Minnesota by 1 freaking point. Is anybody talking about Minnesota right now? Is Minnesota even bowl eligible? So it's like Penn State went down to the wire with Wisconsin. Is Wisconsin a good team? The answer is no. Minnesota? The answer is no. It's like they're not Goliath. This isn't David versus Goliath. SMU belongs. I do also love that Indiana and SMU are the 2 teams that are kicking off this college football playoff. Like the first 2 games we watch are these teams that are up and comers, like aren't the household names we're used to, and then they're playing against some of the oldest names we're used to. So I'm very excited about those 2. But I'm also very excited about this next game, Jake. Very excited.
I'm very excited to see SMU release the graphic to see, since Charlotte was in the mountains, where is State College?
Antarctica.
Yeah. State College. Charlotte's in the wintry mountains. Where is State College?
Yeah, it is in the North Pole.
Let's talk about Clemson and Texas. This is the game that you're dying to talk about here. Actually, before we do that, let's do our underdog picks, since I want to do our underdog picks, and then we'll get into the rest of these.
Okay.
So our underdog picks, if you haven't been playing with us, underdog is a great way to play all season long. We got bowl season coming up. Join us. Make sure that you're making your pick'em entries. You can do drafts. There's all sorts of different options. I was looking at the website today. They've got all the different sports. NFL playoffs are still coming up. Baseball will be here before you know it. Hockey, basketball, whatever you're into. Make sure you use promo code WALK-ON. You can get your first pick for free and a first-time deposit up to $1,000 in bonus cash. Visit UnderdogFantasy.com. You can find them in the App Store. You must be 18 or older to play. We didn't do, obviously, last week. I'm going to let you go first. What are your first 2?
First off, no spoilers, but Jake, I know what you're doing. I'm looking at your picks. I know what you're doing.
I don't have one. I only have 1 in the last 2 games. You have 0.
No. I know what you're doing with your underdog pick.
Okay.
We'll talk about it. After I'll go into deeper detail after you do your picks. Riley Leonard higher than 53.5 yards rushing. I know I just sat there and told you that Indiana's going to be able to get up for quarterback and put some pressure on them, and Riley Leonard's going to have. But I think because of how good Indiana is at stopping the run, they are going to have to get pretty creative with how they run the football. And I think Riley Leonard's going to be able to do that. He's only done that in 5 games this year, believe it or not, Jake. He's only run for over 53.5 yards, higher than 53.5 yards, Underdog Fantasy, in 5 games this year. But most of those games he didn't do it in, they were complete and absolute bloodbaths. So it's like he didn't need to do it. It wasn't like he needed to run the football. So I'm thinking he can do that because of the game plan, not necessarily because of whatever reason. And then Kevin Jennings. We've already talked about these 2 games. I'm jumping right in it. I think Kevin Jennings higher than 250.5 pass and rush yards. He will do that easily. He's done that in 9 straight games, which are essentially the 9 games that he started this year. He did it against Clemson. And believe it or not, so everyone wants to think he's a run-first quarterback. He's not. He hits over 250 yards passing, and he hit to over 250 yards passing predominantly out of those 9 games. So he doesn't even need the rushing yards to add to it. And that's just a little icing on the cake. So I think he's going to be able to do that against this Penn State team. Because I think they're going to be flushing him out of the pocket. Like you said, Abdul Carter's going to be getting after him. He's gonna be running like a chicken with his head cut off. We're going to see a lot of broken down plays and backyard football in that game.
I'll go with my two now. So my first one, I have Dylan Sampson going higher than 92.5 rushing yards. He's gone for 92 in all but one game this year, and that one he didn't was UTEP because they blew them out. Mm-hmm. But other than that, he has crossed at least 92. So there's one game he went for 92. So 92.5 in all but one.
You're doing reverse psychology jinxing right here. This is what I'm talking
about. This one is like easy money. He's done it against everybody.
Jake, who are they playing? Who's he playing against?
They're always playing against Ohio State.
Yeah, and so you're trying. I know you're doing some voodoo magic to try to pull out a Buckeye victory.
Khalil Mullins had his way, and Michigan sucked. So if anybody's going to be able to run the ball, it's probably going to be the second best running back, maybe third best running back in the country.
Listen, where I'm like unbiasedly stupid for Clemson, like, I'm going to think Clemson does everything phenomenally, to a fault. Jake, y'all got to watch him. Y'all got to keep an eye on him. Him throwing Dylan Sampson in here isn't because he doubts his Ohio State Buckeyes. Quite contrary. It's because he knows that Dylan Sampson's not going to hit it, and he's going to be laughing at all you people who took the over on this. I'm telling you, don't fall for it. Don't fall for his little tricks.
Or you can take the easy money. And then I have Drew Aller going higher than 248.5 passing and rushing yards. I wanted to go with just his passing yards, but went back and looked. There's been a bunch of games where he would finish with like 200 passing yards, but then run for 50 yards. I think combining the passing and the rushing yards here, he's done this in 3 of his 4 last games, including against Oregon. The one game he didn't, I believe, was either Washington or Maryland, but they blew him out, so it wasn't as necessary. So I think he'll cross this now too.
He's a better runner than people think. And he doesn't run for 40, 30, 20 yards.
I was playing college football today, and they called him one of the fastest quarterbacks in the country, and I about turned it off because I was like, no, he is not. He can run, but he is not one of the fastest fastest quarterbacks in the country.
Who won that game when you played, and who were you?
I was SMU, and I got my tail whipped by Penn State. I lost 24-3. It was 9-3 entering the fourth quarter. It was 63 at halftime, and then I gave up 2 big plays in the fourth quarter and lost.
We couldn't run the ball. Mode?
Yeah,
that's because Tyler Warren was in the Heisman. Was in Heisman.
He did score one of them. I did force a couple turnovers. Made Nick Singleton fumble the ball. Made Drew Aller throw an interception on the first drive. Could not convert much on them as we only scored 3 points. Anyways. The Sugar Bowl bracket, or my bad, not Sugar Bowl, Peach Bowl bracket with Clemson and Texas. This is a 3:30 game or 4 o'clock, whatever time it starts on Saturday. How does Clemson win this game?
Clemson wins this game by not turning the ball over, by keeping, not playing not playing behind the sticks, so not giving up tackles for loss, and establishing a average run game. So if Clemson hasn't played a complete game all year. They have not played all 4 quarters in a game. And when Clemson's been good, they've been damn good. And, Jake, you and I were talking about this a little bit before the show. It's scary that Clemson hasn't played their best game yet in 2 ways. Number one, it's scary because they could go out there and just boat race Texas and look great living at all 4 quarters, and that's what you could get. But you could also get SMU where they're up 17, they blow it. You could get Georgia where it's 6-3 or whatever, 6-0 going into half, and then they blow it in the third quarter. So it's like, who are you going to get? Are you finally going to get the 4 quarters put together? Are you going to finally get the 3 pieces of football and special teams, offense and defense playing as one? So I'm curious to see that. I think we're going to see a more than Phil Maffa run the football this week. I think we're going to see a lot of Keith Adams Jr. I think we're going to see a lot of David Ezemume. Easy E is what they call him. So I think we might even see some Jarvis Green sprinkled in there a little bit. So I think they're going to do some running by committee. Phil Maffa touching the ball 30 to 40 times a game has been to our detriment at this point, not because of Phil Maffa, but because, it wears him down. We play college football 25. It's, you look at wear and tear. So I think some of these younger guys are going to get a big opportunity in this game. Another thing is I don't think Texas has a top 10 defense. They're third in the country in defense. They've only allowed 4 passing touchdowns all year. They're phenomenal. They don't give up big chunk plays. I think they're they're first in the country or top 10 in the country in 20+ yard play allowed. They don't do that. And Clemson's 6 in 20+ yard plays for offensively. So again, we look at the matchup with SMU and Penn State. One's really good at getting after getting you behind the sticks, and one's good at not giving it up. Let's look at Clemson, where Texas doesn't give up big plays, and Clemson loves the big play, relies on the big play sometimes. When you can't run the football, you really need that big play. So, I mean, it's crucial. It's crucial that they at least average 3 yards a carry. We cannot have a game where we average 2 yards a carry like we did against SMU. We cannot have a game where Cade is the only runner. You have to have some sort of formidable running back there. We're getting Tyler Brown back at wide receiver. That's going to be huge. Now you have 4 legitimate targets at wide receiver in Antonio Williams, TJ Moore, Tyler Brown, Bryant Wesco. I think these are the best receivers that Texas has faced all year. No offense to Georgia, but I mean, I mean, we're gonna put this pass defense to the test. And go back to my key of the game of playing ahead of the sticks and not turning the ball over. Texas is 113th in the country in turnovers lost. They've turned the ball over 22 times this year. And they're also 118th in tackles for loss allowed. They allow 6.85 tackles for loss a game. Let's go on the defensive side for Clemson. Clemson is 8th in the country in turnovers caused with 25, and they're 21st in the country with tackles for loss in a game at 6.9. So if you're going to get after Texas, that's the way to do it. The other key stat is Quinn Ewers. Quinn Ewers is I think has an 88 QBR with no pressure. You know what his QBR is when he's facing pressure, Jake?
Probably like 55.
Lower.
35.
Lower.
25.
Lower.
15.
18.
Ooh,
it is an 18 QBR.
Good.
Now, on the flip side, he's really good against the blitz. I think he's one of the best quarterbacks in the country against the blitz. So what does that tell you? You need to get after him with 4 and 5 guys. You need to be able to put pressure on him. What does Clemson do best? TJ Parker lives in opponents' backfields. I am curious to see how our defensive ends do against this Texas football team. Another thing that's key is Texas has not been consistent running the football all year. They're 64th in the country in rushing yards a game. That bodes very well for Clemson because their Achilles heel on defense is the rushing attack. So I'm very excited for this game. Texas is a legitimate football team. Obviously, right now I'm trying to poke holes in them. I want to tell you how Clemson could beat them. But don't get it twisted. Texas can score. They can score almost at will. That when that offense is at its best, it is phenomenal. And obviously the defense speaks for itself. 15th in the country in rush defense, first in the country in pass defense, 3rd overall defense. I mean, they're just freaking good on that side of the ball. So we're in for a dogfight, but I think it's going to be a high-scoring affair.
Yeah, and Steve Sarkisian's one of the best offensive minds in college football. I think he got a case of the James Franklins in the SEC championship game where he was overthinking himself. There were times in that game that he was trying to force the run when it wasn't necessary. And does he have a chance to reflect 2 weeks now, understanding that, okay, if you want to win it all, you got to win 4 games. If you want to, you got to start with 1, but obviously the end goal is to win the national championship, which, side note, I've seen a bunch of people online and there's a constituent of like, oh, well, they're looking past the first game. No, it's understanding that you're in the postseason now. You've got to win 4 games. Nobody's looking past it. But when they're asked a question, the goal isn't, well, we win the first one and then hopefully we win the second one. No, at this point, the goal is to win 4 in a row.
Right.
The goal is to win 4 in a row, or if you're in the next round, it's to win 3 in a row. It doesn't matter. Doesn't mean they're looking across. It's here's where it is. The goal is to win it all. It's not just, well, if we win 1, we're happy. No, they want to win 4. So it has nothing to do with overlooking somebody. It's just, this is where we're at in football at this point. If this was a 14 playoff, they'd be wanting to win 2. But anyways, I think Sarkisian overthought himself a little bit, understanding that, okay, you had a little bit of a weird situation because you weren't really expecting the defense to have to adjust to a new quarterback. Carson Beck goes out. Not that that is good or bad or changes the game plan. It's just, it's a different thing you're looking at and you have to be able to adjust. And Quinn Ewers did not play his best game. I thought he missed on some throws that he should have hit on, but they were hitting on throws, and I don't know why they were going away from the passing attack rather than continuing to run it on early downs against Georgia. I think that they have to be able to establish the run, at least at a minimum, that it's a threat. I think Texas can get away with being a pass-heavy offense against Clemson, but I don't think they need to continue to force the run to make it work to win. I think they can get away with running the ball 18 times in this game and winning. I don't think they have to try to force the ball 25, 28 times up the middle, off the tackle, around the edge. If you want to run it that many times, you got to get started getting creative. It's got to be quarterback runs. It's got to be end of rounds. You got to get the receivers involved. You got to do other things. But for Clemson, I think you can't put this game all on Cade Klubnik's shoulders. No. You cannot just put this game on Cade Klubnik's shoulders and say, go win the game.
Right.
If you need to use a drive where you're passing heavy, I understand that. But we're not walking into this game and saying, all right, Klubnik's throwing the ball 45 times today. Cade throws the ball 45 times. That's a bad sign for Clemson.
Yeah, it hasn't boded well for us. I mean, despite the improvements we've seen from Cade, he can't win it all on his own. So we really, really, really need to get that running game going. I cannot stress that enough. And I know that's probably why you're picking. I mean, you haven't said it yet, but I'm assuming you're going to pick Texas. And I think it would. I mean, I can't blame you. That hurts.
When you look at the two teams, Texas has lost twice to one team who is arguably the most talented team in the country, maybe second behind Oregon. Clemson has been up and down and nearly lost to teams that were significantly worse. Like Pitt should not have been a close game. They were way better than Pitt. And it needed a miracle Cade Klubnik 50-yard run, which still to me makes no sense how Cade Klubnik had a 50-yard run in the middle for a touchdown.
That's what's crazy. What has Texas done in close games? I mean, what game can you look back that's a close game that they were able to pull it out the hat? I mean, you look at maybe Vanderbilt.
And Quinn Ewers was struggling that game. Quinn Ewers.
Right. And you look at the other one you look at is Georgia. The two Georgia games, they were in it the entire game and just could not get that big play to put it away.
Yeah, no other game was really that close. I mean, Texas A&M was close. They only won by 10 points, and they put Texas A&M away. But it was incredibly low scoring. Texas A&M's defense held them. But other than that, Vanderbilt, Texas A&M, other than that, they pretty much blew out everybody else.
Right.
Now, nobody else was really good on their schedule. Everybody else kind of sucked on their schedule. So it's hard to look at this and say, like, yeah, you played another top 25 team, because you didn't. A&M is your biggest win this season, and that's not saying much. So I think that their defense is going to get tested. I'm really interested to see what the wide receivers do, and Sark's got to call a better game. Sark has to call a better game.
Yeah.
If he doesn't call a better game, I think Clemson can win this game for sure, especially if they try to push the ball up the middle 20 times. Speaking of pushing the ball up the middle 20, 25 times, if Ohio State comes out on Saturday and tries to take their makeshift offensive line and run Judkins and Henderson up the middle 25 times, they're going to lose. They will lose. They couldn't do that against Michigan, who had Davis Warren out there, who threw multiple interceptions, and they couldn't do it. Ohio State has arguably, if they don't have the best receiving core in the country, it's in the top 5. I think that's pretty agreeable.
Yeah.
Between Carnell Tate, Jeremiah Smith, Mecca Ibuka, those three alone should all get the ball at least 5 times on Saturday.
Yeah. And if they don't, then Chip Kelly's a word I don't want to say on this podcast.
He's an idiot. He's an idiot.
Yeah, that's putting it kindly.
You need to get the ball to Judkins and Henderson in some way, but you can't just continue to run it up the middle.
Well, be creative. Be freaking creative. Your offensive line is patchwork. Be creative with how you run the freaking football. There's so many different ways to run the football in this league. Why are you just running it? Why are you running up the middle all the time?
And
Your
they
center
did
is
a
out.
couple. Yeah, Yeah, who won the Remington Award? Who's for the best center in the country? He's out. He's done for the year. He's towards Achilles. He's not coming back. There's nothing. You saw them against Michigan where they tried to get creative a couple times, and I don't know why they didn't get back to this. They did, shotgun, and they did a pitch to the right, to Judkins or Henderson, a pitch that gets them off the tackle and puts them in space where then they're going against, linebackers and cornerbacks rather than, up the middle against 300-pound defensive tackles and hoping that your 300-pound guys beat their 300-pound guys.
Right.
It's a little bit easier when your tight ends and wide receivers are blocking linebackers and safeties than, a patchwork offensive line against a strong defensive line. And I don't think Tennessee is not one to be taken lightly. I think Dylan Sampson is the third best running back in the country. I think he's behind Scadaboo and Jeanty.
Yeah, Caleb Johnson would be the only one you could argue, but we were talking about this at work. I think he's third.
Dylan Sampson is a beast. They're talking about him coming back next year, which is crazy because he's rushed for well over
wear and tear they put on him this year. Yeah, I don't know if that could happen.
That doesn't make sense to me. I think Nico has to play a clean game, though. They got lucky against Alabama because he made a couple of mistakes, but Alabama was also shooting themselves in the foot.
Yeah.
I really hope this is not a game where we're watching Ohio State shoot themselves in the foot and then turn it over to Tennessee and then be like, well, I could shoot myself in the foot even harder than you can because that would suck for everybody.
Well, Jake, it's going to be in the 20s in Columbus.
It's going to be cold. It's going to be dark.
It's going to be cold.
There's going to be lights on, though.
Tennessee's never played in the cold, in the dark, and at night. With no light, with the lights, excuse me. The dark and the night are the same thing. But
I mean, weird stuff happens in cold, dark places.
Ohio State and Tennessee are essentially the same team.
Yes.
And I think the biggest matchup to watch would be Igbenogson. Why am I
you're
blanking on his name? Igbenogson. Number one, the cornerback for Ohio State versus the Tennessee wide receiving core. Deontay Thornton. Thornton is who I was trying to think of. Tennessee's wide receiver core has been very inconsistent all year. You have games where they go off, they look great, they look phenomenal. Then you'll have games where they're dropping passes, they're not getting open, they're, whatever. The same thing with the Ohio State secondary, specifically the corners. Who's the other corner, Jake? I love how he tackles.
Denzel Burke,
thank you. Dude can stop a screenplay. He's the best at stopping the screen. But the corners have been phenomenal at times. You go back and look at Penn State and some of the plays they made. But there are also liabilities at times. You go back to Nebraska. Igbenogson is essentially a walking pass interference. I can go ahead and guarantee you if Ohio State goes man-to-man, they are throwing the ball whoever is lined up with him. It's going to be a deep shot. The game plan is probably if you see man-to-man, run the 9 route, run the deep route. We're just going to throw it up there. Best case scenario, you catch it, touchdown. Band starts playing. Worst case scenario, we get a PI call, right? And I think that's like one of the things that scares me the most about Ohio State because in Ohio State's really good at stopping the run. But when you're giving up, pass interferences on third down and long, stuck it down and long, you're giving free first downs, it starts to wear on you. And in a game where you're both going to be playing similar styles of very, very physical football, that's what wears you down, not the freaking weather. It's going to be the guy across from me that's beating the hell out of you the entire game. So I've been thinking about this game for 3 or 4 days, and I still could not look you in the eye and tell you who I want to pick. Like, this will be a true game time decision when we go to do our picks in a second because it's so up in the air. I think if you look offense, like Will Howard and Nico are very similar. They are very, very similar. Both have the talent to make great throws. They're both semi-mobile. I think Nico might be a little bit more mobile. But at times they also look like boneheads. And it's like, what are you doing? Have you ever played quarterback before? Both have phenomenal running backs. I think Tennessee's is better. No offense, but they're more consistent at running the football. And I think the other liability for Ohio State is that offensive line. Now, they've still been able to hold their own. They're not giving up a lot of sacks, not giving up a lot of tackles for loss. The problem is they're just not moving the ball forward very well. But even with the healthy offensive line, they were struggling with that. This game's going to be tough. But I think this game is won on the perimeter because they're so even inside.
Yeah, you talk about Nico, and Nico is not the quarterback that's airing it out. We talk about, Thornton. They got Brew McCoy over there. They got Squirrel White. They've got a couple decent receivers. I don't want to say decent. They've got good receivers. They've got guys that can make plays on the outside. It's not like their receivers are bums. They've got guys that are talented and can make plays. But the offense they're playing clearly runs through Dylan Sampson, because when you look, Nico's only thrown for more than 200 yards against FBS teams. I want to say that because the first game was against UT Chattanooga, and I'm not counting that game because that wasn't a real game. They won 69-3. I mean, he threw against 200 against NC State, who we thought was going to be a lot better than what they were. Threw against 292 against Kentucky, not the best SEC team. 209 against UTEP, 257 against Vanderbilt. Against Alabama, he threw for 194. Against Oklahoma, he threw for 194. Arkansas, 158. He is not a guy that's going to air it out. They're not going to go and try to throw for 300 yards on Saturday. I think they're going to try to play a similar style of game that Michigan did, is control the clock, work the ball down the field. You're not going to take a ton of deep shots. You might take here and there, but you're going to try to methodically move the ball down the field and eat away that clock. You don't want Ohio State to get, 12, 14 possessions, because that's just more times that you have to try to guard their wide receivers. Eventually they're going to break one open. Even though Ohio State lost to Michigan, Jeremiah Smith eventually broke one open. It was in the first half, but eventually it happened. These guys will eventually do it. I don't think they want to put their corners out there as many times. I think they want to try to limit that game and slow it down. So I think the key for Tennessee is getting 4, 5, 6 yards on first down every time. If you can get it to 2nd and 5, 2nd and 6, 2nd and 4, you put yourself in money situations. For Ohio State, you've got to not run the same game plan as Michigan. That's basically what you need to do. Whatever that game plan was, burn it, never look at it again. If anybody even mentioned something similar, just throw them out of the building, because you can't run that same game plan. So, yeah, if you run the same game plan that you did against Michigan, it's going to be a failure, and it's not going to go well.
I don't know what's going on with my camera, Jake. Sorry.
That's fine. We can go without camera.
All right. A little bit of technical difficulties.
I'll edit all this part out. If Ohio State runs the same game plan that they did, they will lose. If they run the same game plan they had against Michigan, they will lose.
Well, and I think you have to take that game plan out of, just burn it. And I know you said that, but I even as the viewers, we have to burn that, or analysts, because I think that game was more emotional than anything. Even though Chip Kelly wasn't involved, I think hearing over and over how Michigan just out physicals you, like gets to the players, gets to everybody. And I think they really want to go out there and prove a point to their own detriment instead of playing their game. And their game should have been getting the ball to Jeremiah Smith freaking 10 times a game.
Nobody cares if you're soft if you win the game.
Exactly.
Nobody cares about anything other than the final score. Nobody's going to look back and be like, well, we rushed for more yards. Yeah, well, we won the game. So
right.
That's what's the important thing.
That's right.
So I agree with your point earlier, though, about the Ohio State defense. Now, Michigan was finding some success running the ball with Kalel Mullings up the middle. Dylan Sampson is better than Kalel Mullings to me. Ohio State has to keep those first down runs to 2 yards or less. They've got to find a way to get some stops in the backfield, which Ohio State's not the best at. Their defensive line does fine, but they struggle to get and wrap guys up behind the line.
Yeah, you're right. They're 6.5. They're 33rd in the country, so they're above average. And I think like you're saying, you have to put the game in Nico's hands. You have to make him go out and beat you for Ohio State to win. I think if they can make Nico have to make plays in third and long, third and medium, in non-running downs, non-running distances, I think that bodes very well for Ohio State.
I agree. I think if Nico has to go and you need Nico to throw for 250 to 300 yards, it's going to be tougher because while Ohio State's defense, like they are handsy, they do, struggle at times. You still have guys like Caleb Downs in the back there that can make plays. So Igbenogson, probably going to get 1 or 2 pass interference calls. Almost certainly going to happen. If you just expect it, doesn't hurt as bad. But Caleb Downs is probably going to do something special because he seems to do it in the biggest moments.
Right.
So he's come off hot the last 2 games. He had a punt return against Indiana. He had a interception against Michigan. He's bound to do something again on Saturday. So we'll see. But I look for Caleb Downs to be one of the biggest impact players on Saturday as well. Let's get into our picks. So we're only picking the 4 here this week. Let's start with Friday night. We've got Indiana traveling to Notre Dame. Notre Dame 7.5-point favorite. Who do you like?
Regardless, I'm picking Indiana to cover. And you know what? They're my underdog team. I have to ride with them, Jake. I have to. The Choo Chooser Express has made it to the playoffs. And I'm not gonna let Notre Dame take that away from them.
I think Notre Dame's defense is just too good.
Yeah.
I think Notre Dame's defense is just too good. I would love to see Indiana win. The underdog story continues. I think their defense is just too good, and Indiana's not going to be able to do enough.
Yeah. Plus, another thing that's boding well for Notre Dame that we didn't talk about was one of their. I think he was projected to be a starting left tackle. I think he was the freshman, who got hurt like in training camp going into the first game, is back for Notre Dame. So that now not only do they potentially have their starter back, even if he doesn't start, he's good to play or to come in. Good depth piece. So that bodes well for Notre Dame and the Fighting Irish.
Yeah, I can't imagine after starting a left tackle for 12 games that you would bring a guy in unless it was
especially since it's been working. If it ain't broke, don't fix it.
Exactly. The Saturday afternoon game, early game, SMU versus Penn State. SMU is an 8.5-point dog against Penn State.
Listen, I'm a dog this week. I'm a dog this weekend. So give me SMU to cover. Man, I want to say SMU is going to win. Another underdog pick of mine. You have to think that Penn State just gets it done, though, right? Like I'm going to go with SMU. Go ahead. Sorry.
I would say I have Penn State covering this, but I could see SMU covering the spread.
Right.
8.5. I could 100% see this being a 1-score game. I could see this coming down late. I can see SMU scoring late to make it a 7-point game. I think Penn State gets it done. I think this is the 12-team playoff was created for teams like Penn State.
We
created
talked
for
about this.
teams like Penn State. Teams that were really good but couldn't get over the hump. And this is
Right.
one of the best Penn State teams of the last, 10, 15 years. This might be James Franklin's best Penn State team.
Yeah.
And I think they get it done. Penn State has potentially a very easy cakewalk. If they win this and then they go play Boise, then they would play potentially winner of Indiana, Georgia, Notre Dame. So we'll see. But I think Penn State gets it done this week.
Yeah. I don't blame you.
Clemson's 11.5-point dog on the road at Texas this weekend.
You already know. I think Clemson comes in there. I think Clemson shocks the nation. I think Clemson beats them by more than 11.5 points. That's what I'm going to go with. I'm going for Clemson to finally play their full 4 quarters. Give me my Tigers. The Roy bus is cranked up. It's fully running. Dabo's the hottest when he's an underdog. We just dipped into the portal, Jake. The vibes are high in Tiger Town. So give me my Tigers.
I'm going to take Texas. What you said that Clemson hasn't played a complete game. I have a hard time thinking on the road in Austin is when the time that they're going to show up and play a complete game. I'm going to take the Longhorns. I think Sark comes back and calls a better game this week.
I can't blame you. I really can't. We have everything we've done this year has led to what you're picking right now, but we're going to shock the nation. We're going to change everybody's minds.
Tennessee, Ohio State. Tennessee is a 7.5-point dog in Columbus on Saturday. Who do you like?
I look at
you
the
want me to go first?
You go first.
I think Ohio State wins, but Tennessee covers. I think the over-under for this game is like crazy low. It's like 42 points.
Yeah.
So I think Ohio State wins, but Tennessee covers. I think we're looking at like a 21-17 game.
Yeah, I'm completely on board with that. What I think we see Dylan Sampson have some big runs. I think Ohio State does a good job with their game plan. I think Jim Knowles is going to have that defense ready to defend the run and put the game in Nico's hands. I think Nico's able to make some plays here and there. He's progressed. He's really matured throughout the season. I like. Man, Jake, this is tough. Because I look at the matchups, and then you come down to it in a game like this in the playoffs. Most of the time you can point at 6 plays that make a difference. When the teams are this even, it comes down to the single digit 6 plays. And who do you trust to make plays when you need it the most? And that is Jeremiah Smith. Who else do you trust to make plays when you need it the most? That's Carnell Tate. Who has Tennessee been able to rely on when they really need to make those plays late in the game? You look at Arkansas. They couldn't just keep running the football. You look at Georgia. They couldn't run the football. The teams that have been able to make Dylan Sampson earn his 92.5 yard average on the season, or whatever it is, 100-yard average on the season, are the teams that have given him the most trouble. You look at Arkansas, you look at Georgia, you look at Kentucky. They struggled with Kentucky early. They ended up blowing them out. There was one other game they struggled with, went down to the wire. They ended up winning. But anyway, long story short, give me Ohio State to win. Give me Tennessee to cover.
I think we're on the same page there. I'd be shocked if either team hits 30 on Saturday.
And I'm going to go ahead and call my shot. I think it's a 3-point game, 4-point game at the end, and Jeremiah Smith makes a huge play at the late in the fourth quarter. Go ahead touchdown that ices the game. So you heard it here first, folks. Number 4 on the field, number 1 in your heart, Jake.
For sure, number 1 in my heart. Well, that does it for our episode this week. We will be back again at some point. Holidays coming up, so we'll make sure that we get another episode out before the quarterfinals, because we have 4 more games that are coming up on New Year's Eve, New Year's Day. We appreciate everybody joining in. Make sure to subscribe to the podcast. We're on Spotify. We're on Apple. Wherever you listen to your podcast. Give us a rate, 5-star, 4-star, whatever you feel that we deserve. Make sure to give us a rate. Helps us out immensely. Go and follow us on social media. We are on Twitter, X, Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, anywhere that you get social media content. We are probably there. Make sure to follow Will at Walk on Moose on Twitter. Great follow. He dropped down under 1,000 for a second because, X decided to clean up all their bots, and apparently he had too many bot accounts following him.
But I'm back.
But he's back.
Hey, I'm back. Don't hate on the bots. Big Botswana guy.
Yeah, don't hate on the bots. So with that being said, I hope everybody enjoys their holidays, and we'll be back again after the first round of the college football playoffs.
Merry Christmas and Merry College Football Playoff-ness.